Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Regional Development Assessment Panel meeting of the 28th of March. Before we get the meeting underway, I just want to make sure everyone can hear us and we can hear you. Canella?
Yes, good afternoon.
Councillor Binks, you can hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Councillor Christofini?
Yes, I can.
Okay, terrific. My name's Tony Arias and I'm the presiding member. I'll introduce the other panel members. Canella Hope, who's the deputy presiding member. John Syme, who's the specialist member. We have Councillor Binks, the local government member from the Shire of Augusta-Margaret River, and Councillor Christofini, who is also local government member, Shire of Augusta-Margaret River. In terms of the DAP Secretariat, we have Billy Sejan, who's the Minute Secretary, and Ashley Kelly, who is looking after governance, keeping us all straight. So with those preliminaries, I will formally declare the meeting open and at 1:07 and acknowledge the traditional owners and pay respects to elders past and present of the land on which the meeting is being held. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the information. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the DAP website in accordance with Regulation 42A of the Planning Development Assessment Panel regulations. Item 2, apologies, we have Neil. Item 3, members on leave of absence, Neil. Item 4 is for information, just that minutes of previous meetings are on the DAP website. So we move to part B of the agenda, which is Shire of Augusta-Margaret River. First item is declarations of due consideration. Members, I need you to declare that you duly consider all the information provided, including within Part B and Part B of the agenda and Part B of the information. That includes additional information provided by Astrid Savanti and by Councillor Christofini. Members, are you able to declare by raising your hand that you've duly declared? Okay, or duly declared. Thank you. Item 2, disclosures of interest. We have had a disclosure from Councillor Christofini, and it's a declaration of interest impartiality. The reason for that is that one of the submitters sent information directly to her. Councillor Christofini advises submitter that the information would be provided to the DAP Secretariat, which has occurred, and the information has been provided to all members. In accordance with DAP standing orders, I'm satisfied that Councillor Christofini can act with impartiality and participate and vote on the item. Members, are there any other disclosures? In terms of local government members, just information, if the item has gone to the council meeting and has been considered, it's advised by standing orders that members make a declaration. Councillors, is that necessary? Has the item gone to council?
Yes. Okay,
and you both participated in the item?
Yes.
Yeah.
I participated.
Yeah, okay. In which case, I need you both to make a declaration that you're able to exercise independent judgment in considering the matter.
I, Paula Cristofanini, can exercise independent judgment in relation to the matter that we're hearing today.
Thank you. Councillor Binks?
Yes, I also can provide a declaration that I'll be considering this matter solely on its merits.
Thank you. So item 3, we move to the actual item before us. So it's lot 101 Warcliffe Road, Margaret River, and it's a proposed boutique hotel. And we we move to presentations. We do have a number of presentations. The standing orders provide for 3-minute presentation. I have granted an extension to Anthony Rowe for an additional 2 minutes, given there is considerable discussion around bushfire and bushfire safety. And I'm prepared to also offer a similar extension to Ray Swartz if he thinks it's necessary in terms of fairness. In terms of other presenters, I'd suggest you sort of focus on the key elements, because you do only have 3 minutes, which is not a lot of time, and I will remind you when 3 minutes is up and ask you to conclude. At the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions. So before we move to the actual presentations, also note for members that we do have a written submission from Ms. Savanti, and that has been circulated, and that's part of the agenda. So the first presenter, Jamie McCall. Jamie, there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity to make a submission. I'm here on behalf of Preserve Narrabri, a community group incorporated under the Surf Riders Foundation. My objection to this proposal is solely on the grounds of its ability to satisfy the requirements of the AMR Shire Local Planning Scheme 1 and State Planning Policy 3.7. I admire the extensive work that has gone into the design of this proposal. Many of the elements look wonderful. No doubt development is possible on this site in some form. Firstly, I would like to highlight the requirement for the proposal to conform to the AMR Local Planning Scheme 1. The proposal does not meet the provisions of clause 5.19 of LPS 1. That clause is applicable to this proposal and states that any fire management plan is required to be endorsed by the Fire and Emergency Services Authority of Western Australia. DFAS, the relevant authority, has not endorsed the Bushfire Management Plan, and the proposal would therefore appear to not be compliant with LPS 1. While the deemed provisions, section 67, do not allow discretion to the decision maker except where the scheme grants that discretion, and there is no specific discretionary clause connected to clause 5.19. Secondly, SPP 3.7 has evolved as state government policy in response to decades of fires that have caused loss of property and life. It is unlikely the policy will be weakened in our drying climate. AMR Shire is currently experiencing its driest year in recorded history. This is a problem that is getting worse, not better. I'd like to pose a question for the committee to consider in its deliberations. If SPP 3.7 is not to be applied in the designated fire-prone AMR Shire on a proposal located in an extreme fire danger area and with building elements of the proposal located in bushfire attack level 40 and bushfire attack level flame zone designated areas of the site, where would it be applied? There are no possible higher fire risk designations available. There is no worse situation in which to locate a vulnerable land use. The report admits that the proposal is non-compliant with SPP 3.7. DFAS lists the extensive non-compliance over a number of pages. The proponents' consultants will tell you of the alternative performance principle solutions they have used. What they will not talk about is the necessity for those performance principle solutions to equal or exceed the acceptable solutions, and for that performance to be measurable and proven. Please see the guidelines 4.5.2.2. They will not tell you that their shelter on-site option exceeds the maximum acceptable number in SPP 3.7 of 100 people in the guidelines, page 34. They will not bring your attention to the precautionary principle which is repeatedly emphasised in SPP 3.7 and guidelines. I urge the committee to make their decision today in the light of the precautionary principle as required by SPP 3.7 and refuse a proposal that will increase the threat and risk of bushfire to people, property and infrastructure in direct contradiction of the objectives of SPP 3.7. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. Members, questions of Mr. McCall? Mr. McCall, just a point of clarification. Is the objection from Preserve Narrabri Group simply in relation to fire safety? Is that in respect of other matters, is the group satisfied?
Yeah, our concerns relate specifically to the fire aspect of the proposal.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any questions for your presentation? Next presenter, Ray Swartz.
Am I on?
You are. Ray, just before you commence, as I indicated in the introduction, I'm prepared to grant an extension a couple of minutes for you just to get through the submission. So you've got 5 minutes if you need to.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I guess I can just read a little bit slower. I won't probably be adding to what I've already written. But anyway, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. Climate change and biodiversity loss are now widely accepted as posing the greatest long-term threat to human well-being. We are currently experiencing the longest dry spell on record in Margaret River. This is only predicted to get worse. Those from this region who are here today will be experiencing that firsthand. Some of you are amongst the decision makers and advisors that will, by small increment, determine whether this situation gets worse or improves. I'd like to make 2 points. One, that this development is fundamentally unsustainable, which contradicts our commitment to sustainability at both the state and local level, and that the Responsible Authority report fails to give due regard to State Planning Policy 3.7. Tourism contributes about 8% to global carbon emissions, with high-end tourism contributing per capita by far the greatest proportion of that. Tourism is a recent phenomenon that is enabled and supported by affluent societies like ours. The more affluent, the more unsustainable. High-end tourism, which is what this resort represents, is the most unsustainable sector in an unsustainable industry. Those speaking in support of this development today will extol its sustainability credentials, claiming it will bring enormous value to the community. These claims are self-serving and simply not true. They failed to acknowledge the full gamut of human activities and demands that high-end tourism places on the natural world in both the short and long term. The cumulative effect of lifestyles and development that have a high ecological footprint will increase the frequency and intensity of bushfires statewide. This region is affected more than most. State Planning Policy 3.7 was created as a reactive tool to deal with these increasing threats. What the Responsible Authority report does is little more than stoke the fire. It ignores our commitment to sustainability and fails to give adequate regard to a policy designed to protect life and infrastructure. DFES stated the bushfire management plan does not meet the acceptable solutions nor the performance criteria as outlined in Policy 3.7. It concluded the development is situated on a lot surrounded by an extreme hazard. In the opinion of DFES, it cannot be adequately managed. DFES also stated that the development fails to meet the intent of Element 5 of the guidelines. This undermines the belief that the solutions found in Element 5 support this application. The North Stoneville development was recently rejected by the WA Planning Commission because it couldn't meet the policy requirements. That decision was made citing the precautionary principle. The lack of safe traffic exit from the site was central to the decision. The Warcliffe proposal shares this same problem. And finally, the objectives of State Planning Policy 3.7 are clear. Avoid any increase in the threat of bushfire to people, property and infrastructure. The preservation of life and the management of bushfire impact are paramount. For that to be achieved, decision makers must commit to the precautionary principle and long-term thinking that underpins sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swartz. And within the allotted time. Thank you for that. Members, questions? Similar question, Mr. Swartz, that I put to Mr. McCall. You did make references to sustainability of the development.
Yes.
Is that in the context of fire safety, or is that a broader view?
Well, I think the two are totally connected. the reason, that's why they're completely connected. That's why SPP 3.7 was created, because of for quite some time now, modern cultures have been lifestyles are unsustainable, which contributes to chemical composition of the atmosphere, which contributes to climate change, which means increasing chances of more frequent fires and
Okay, no, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Members, no other questions? Thank you, Mr. Swartz. Next presenter, Jenny Lee, representing the Margaret River Busselton Tourism Association.
Sorry, it's Ashley at the DAP Secretariat. Jenny, if you can just accept to be a panelist so we can promote you to talk. Thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I think I missed something there. Am I okay to proceed? Sorry.
Yes, you are.
Great. Thank you. I am reading this statement on behalf of our Chair, Stuart Hicks. The Margaret River Busselton Tourism Association, MRBTA, is the local tourism organisation for the Capes region of Western Australia, extending from Busselton in the north to Augusta in the south, extending along the coast and through Margaret River midway. MRBTA has over 700 members, making it probably the largest local tourism organisation in the nation. It is the respectful view of MRBTA that the Landsmith proposal for the Wallcliffe site deserves strong support for 3 key reasons. Number 1, the purpose of the proposed development. The Wallcliffe development will reconstitute the ruined heritage buildings of Wallcliffe in a manner which reflects their great cultural and social value. It repurposes them to a function which will safeguard them into the future, guaranteeing ongoing maintenance and care. At the same time, the Wallcliffe development will fill a long-standing gap in the tourism offering of the Margaret River region. Tourism is the region's biggest industry, yet it is seriously short of options for the luxury accommodation that appeals to high-value tourists. Number 2, the proponents have pursued highest levels of community consultation throughout the detailed planning process. Over a prolonged period, the proponents have engaged in meaningful dialogue with the community. They have been personally present, intently listening, and have demonstrated willingness to modify and improve their plans as a result of that communication. MRBTA knows a few better examples of business planning informed by a dialogue within our community. We are comforted by the assurance of the Underlook Aboriginal Association and Wadandi Elder Dr. Wayne Webb that it has been fully consulted throughout the planning for redevelopment of Wallcliffe House and that it also supports the plan. Number 3, the proponents recognise a continuing duty of care to safeguard the site in perpetuity. The Landsmith proponents are respected in the Margaret River region as people of integrity whose commercial endeavours in the region reflect strong practical commitment to the community's social, ecological, cultural heritage and Indigenous values. Their long-standing custody of the Voyager Estate Vineyard has helped prove this commitment and helped embed them as part of our community. MRBTA is satisfied that proponents bring a sensitivity to the site which understands that its preservation and care is not just good business sense, but also an undertaking to the region and its community. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Members, any questions? No? Jenny, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Next presenter is Alexandra Burke.
What a presentation, very much.
Technology is not our friend at the moment.
I am no better. I'm admiring the work. And this will be the same presentation. So
You're happy just to click through.
so these
Just to say this.
pictures.
Laura, what's your name, sorry?
What the USB? Just get it from the emails. Oh, sorry. Just the video. You can just take a seat, we'll turn the camera on and just. Okay. Good. Okay. Yep. No. Oh, I can't. Can you go back one? Thanks. Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Thank you, panel members, and good afternoon. And on behalf of our team, I'd like to acknowledge that we live and work on both Whadjuk Noongar Butcher and Wurundjeri Butcher, and we pay our respects to the elders past and present of these peoples and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders today. Wharcliffe House sits gently alongside Wooditcha, the Margaret River. It also sits at the intersection of Aboriginal and European culture, and it sits at the geographic and spiritual heart of Western Australia's preeminent regional tourism destination, the Margaret River region. The development of Wharcliffe House will unlock new tourism potential through our offering of deep connection to place in our high-end and elegantly designed setting. The site itself expresses extraordinary landscape characteristics, with an historic European garden surrounded by the wild beauty of coastal flora and the salty ocean air. Preserving this landscape has been the starting point for the design brief. This philosophy of preserving landscape has also informed our approach to bushfire safety, which, given its history at this site, is ever present in our minds. With its cultural and environmental sensitivities, it is important that we take an innovative approach to bushfire planning, and our bushfire consultant, Anthony Rode, will elaborate further on how this has been achieved. At just 25 keys, the scale and design of the hotel reflects a sensitivity to the unique characteristics of this site, keeping environmental pressure to a minimum and maintaining a safe and acceptable level of people and traffic movements. This project will add enormous value to the community. As well as filling a long-time gap in the market, we will generate 70 to 80 local jobs, develop an in-house training centre of excellence, and we will be attracting a high-value traveller who is new to the region, and all of these things will benefit our entire tourism ecosystem. A project as unique and nuanced as this requires a bespoke approach to stakeholder engagement and consultation. Our approach has always been to consult early and regularly, as you can see from the long list of actions, which I won't read out, that we've taken over time with the traditional owners, the broader community, the Shire and the state. The Landsmith Collection brings together a small group of unique places grounded in nature, craft and community. As well as agriculture, ecological repair and sustainability, we're in the business of hospitality, of bringing people together to connect, create memories and experience joy. We show people why special places need to be looked after with care so that they can be enjoyed by future generations. Wharcliffe House is not a standard development. The impetus for this project comes from our love for our region and our community, grounded in our respect for the natural world and for heritage, and in our desire to share unique and valuable places. This is the foundation for the next chapter in this remarkable property's history, so that Wharcliffe House will continue to find a place in the hearts of the Margaret River community. Thank you.
Sandra, thank you. We're right on Members, questions? Questions? I had a question about the bushland cottages. Are you happy to take that, or perhaps do I leave that for someone else?
Well, it may be appropriate to wait until Anthony has finished,
Yep.
and then we can all address
Yeah,
the
that's
questions.
Yeah, we'll do it that way.
It's whatever's relevant.
All right. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So, Matt Middleton.
Thanks, panelists, and for those online. As you will be very aware by now, this is a highly considered proposal on a very complex and nuanced site with a lot of layers to it. There are a lot of formal gardens on the site which are to be retained and enhanced. There are heritage buildings and ruins which are to be rebuilt and celebrated, and there is a riparian zone which will continue to be nurtured and respected. Standing here now, or sitting, I'm part of a vast and specialised team that's been intimately involved for the past 5 years and has consulted widely. From the outset, our first principles approach to master planning has always been to rebuild on previous building footprints, retain the mature trees, respect the significant landscape features, nurture those gardens, and carefully consider the safe access and egress to the site. The result is this collection of bespoke buildings, carefully sited to maximise the trees, minimise the bulk and scale, and maintain the heritage characteristics of the site. Early on, we developed a built form hierarchy to guide a cohesive architectural language across the site. And as you can see from some of the imagery here, these are not modern concrete, glass, steel buildings. They're traditional buildings built out of local and vernacular materials by local people to hopefully stand the test of time. Buildings like Wallcliffe House, rebuilt on their original footprints to the same proportions, scale amongst the gardens. Other buildings in keeping with the heritage characteristics of before, the Dell Dairy rebuilt on exactly the same footprint, the same scale, proportions and materialities, even roof works, the likes, albeit with modern compliance requirements, as you can imagine, fit a place like this. New buildings rebuilt on the site of where former buildings once stood, in keeping with the natural landscape around it. Even operations buildings and car parks have been carefully located, sited and designed to enable the safe access, egress, guests and users, and maintain heritage characteristics of the site. Clearly, it's a unique and carefully considered design. It's a design that is fully supported by the Design Review Panel and the Heritage Council. It has the formal backing of the local Shire and has received Section 18 ministerial approval. Thank you for your consideration.
Thanks, Matt. Members, questions? Councillor Vinks? You're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. I just have one question, and I think this will be easier to see, probably slide 2 or 3 that you just showed us, which is the aerial view of the, yeah, there, that one. No, forward. Next one. Next.
The master plan?
Yes. That'll do. That's great. There, that one there. So I am seeing, correct me if I'm wrong, please, that there is one exit still from the resort. Is that correct?
There is one vehicular exit.
Yeah.
On road currently.
Yep.
We have put in a new crossover.
Yep.
So in theory, there is 2 exits to Wallcliffe Road at that point. But one exit up the driveway.
Oh, okay, so one line of access to the resort and from the resort, but two exits onto the highway itself. Is that right? Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. That's all I needed to see. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Matt, I sort of asked earlier about the bushland cottages. Can you identify them? Are they the ones to the right-hand side, those ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you had slides through the presentation that actually shows the context of those.
I have some here, the cottages of that materiality.
Not the actual visuals of what the cottages look
Not
like?
in this brief 3-minute presentation, my apologies.
Okay, no, that's fine. So none of the slides you had before show those cottages?
No. So this cross section here, you can see one here.
Okay.
And I think maybe we get the people.
You may be thinking, thanks, Alex.
So those ones aren't?
They're not.
No, okay.
Those are not. Those are, that you see in the foreground here is a cottage, but it's not what we would call one of the bush cottage.
Yeah, what are we looking at here?
This is the Leaf Cottage in Cliffwood.
Oh. Okay. Members, any other? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Anthony Rowe.
Stop.
Anthony, as I indicated, you've got a little bit more time.
Yes, I'll probably leave more time for questions.
Yeah, but anyway, you've got 5 minutes if you need it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, presiding member and members online. Thank you very much. As Matt explained, this has actually been quite a complex concept. There are a lot of things that have been traded off in terms of the historic position of the buildings, the site, so. This proposal is actually following a linear path, if you like. So it started with a scheme amendment. Under bushfire, to actually justify that scheme amendment, we needed to demonstrate the capability of the development. So in terms of the approval of the scheme amendment, there's actually no...
Sorry to interrupt, Anthony, you're very hard to hear.
Oh, sorry, but I'll try and shout louder.
Thank you. We just can't hear you very well.
Is the mic?
It's there because we're having issues. It's normally in the roof, but we've had
Voice is
issues.
quite
So,
soft.
yeah.
Sorry about that. I got cold.
Reach it.
Thank you. So do I get an extra 30 seconds?
Oh, and that's the camera. Oh no.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Just have to try and project.
Be
your
nice
voice
and
that
loud.
way. Sorry, technology.
Just hopefully you can hear me. So this proposal is actually proceeded as a comprehensive concept through the stages of the planning process. And it started with scheme amendment to demonstrate that we could actually get the scheme amendment, the design had a fair degree of detail actually in it. So the BMP that supported the scheme amendment addressed most of the material that's actually in the bushfire management plan. And in particular, what that addressed was that the site would be managed as low threat, so that was identified. The restriction on the existing footprints meant that those buildings would be flame zone, and that was accepted. And we also identified that we had a single access and that shelter on site would need to be provided. And those things were all settled at the scheme amendment. And that's been followed through into the bushfire management plan. So the bushfire management plan has actually dealt with these things as performance principles. It's not correct to say that it hasn't. It's not correct to say that it doesn't comply with SP 3.7. It is a mistake to say that non-compliance of acceptable solutions means that you're non-compliant with SP 3.7. We actually comply with the performance principles, and that was actually settled at the scheme amendment. We followed it through with the bushfire management plan. And it is surprising that we have received some criticism that the bushfire management plan has relied on the scheme amendment when in fact that's what we actually have to do. So we have to show that there's a continuum from the scheme amendment through the bushfire management plan. The next stage that we really go to is the very technical design aspects to actually deal with bushfire ratings. So there's two things there that are significant. There's the constructions that require a construction response to BAL FC and BAL 40, and there's also the shelter requirements. So now those solutions, I just need to point out that bushfire is not as intense as what is planned for in structural fires. So structural fires start with an FRL of 60-60. Flame zone has an FRL of 30-30. So it's not as long a lasting fire that we're actually dealing with. regard to the shelter, the BNP has actually committed that shelter to be at an FRL of 60/60. Now, any commercial building that's within 3 metres of the boundary has to provide an FRL of 60/60 to a neighbouring fire source. So a fire source that's 3 metres away. So the construction techniques that we're talking about are not exotic. They're not hypothetical. They're routinely available. They just need to be applied to these particular designs. The challenge for us now is what's the best combination? And that's where things actually start getting time consuming and expensive, and where you need the certainty that you've got planning approval to actually proceed to do that research. At the planning stage, what needs to happen is satisfaction that those things will actually be met. So what's in the BNP actually forms part of the authorisation that is actually enforceable as part of any planning authorisation. It's part of the detail of the application. But our next step is to actually do the detailed design that actually demonstrates that we can achieve the FRL numbers for those buildings that are flame zone. The other really complex part is the shelter needs to show tenability. And that becomes a balance of different materials and heat loads. And depending on your heat load, might affect what your air conditioning system is. It depends on your passive resistance versus your active resistance and those sorts of things. That gets balanced out through research and investigations that we start undertaking now with the fire engineer. So we actually start designing for that tenability. Designing the shelter to actually sustain its fire exposure is not particularly difficult. It's the tenability where we're really focusing our efforts. Now, the other issue that sort of complex in this is that the insurance sector itself has its own expectations and our own preferences. And those things also need to be balanced in terms of the construction solution. We'll still achieve an FRL of 60/60. But how we actually achieve that is still something that we're working through. In terms of planning, it's important that there's certainty that that's what we'll actually achieve, and that's what we're providing in the BNP. So that's pretty much all I really want to discuss at this point, other than that we have followed an orderly process. We start out with the scheme amendment. We've done the BNP. We're waiting to actually proceed to the next step, which is the final details. Now, with regard to things such as the cottages, even though there is some images in the package, we're using ceramic boards, which are non-combustible, but they look like timber. So what you start putting in is materials that actually meet the architectural vernacular, but they're non-combustible, they meet those performance standards. So they're the things that we're actually now into the detail of actually looking at to select. So thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to answer all the questions that you may have.
Members, questions? Ms. Hope?
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation, Anthony. Just to clarify, you're a level 3 assessor yourself?
That's correct.
Okay. And did you have any commentary to make about proposed condition 22, which requires that further third-party review by another level 3 assessor?
Look, I'm comfortable with the recommendation of the council. I know following speaker is going to address that specifically, so probably don't really have anything to add. Only my concern that I raised in my comments was we are following a process that started with the scheme amendment, and most of these issues were resolved there. The BNP gives another opportunity to review some of those considerations. I am a bit concerned if the third party was to be engaged and it was a third bite at the cherry to then question the development again. But I'm satisfied that the council actually wants to keep that quite narrow. They're not wanting to go and revisit the appropriateness of the site. I think that's accepted as being settled. I have no hesitation in terms of another party having a look at what will come up.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, the issue of bushfire risk has been quite a concern of the community. So to reiterate, in your expert opinion, you're satisfied that it can be a compliant proposal and that bushfire risk can be satisfactorily managed?
Yes, in fact, we'll exceed the expectations. So the comment was made about acceptable solutions not being any less than that will exceed the acceptable solutions, and partly will be driven by the insurance sector itself. So the insurance sector has certain views that it wants to see achieved. We expect to actually be probably above what might be required, but they want that for a range of different reasons. At the end of the day, these buildings will be signed off by a fire engineer that they are actually going to be suitable in terms of their intended purpose. So the one that's required for shelter, as I mentioned, it's really important that that achieves the internal tenability. That's a really critical thing. But I should also emphasise that shelter is really a last resort option. Evacuation is in the BMP as the preferred approach. We're not promoting shelter as an alternative. It's only if you can't evacuate. So we've got that as a contingency. So I think it's important to remember that the shelter and all the efforts that we're going to for the shelter, we don't expect ever to use because we think in most cases you'll be able to evacuate. There's certainly been in the bushfire field a lot of game changes, particularly telecommunications means we're alerted earlier than what we were before. It increases our time to actually facilitate evacuation. So even though this is a single access, there are things that actually counterbalance that. But if we can't get out, then we will assure that we have shelter on site that's available.
Thank you. No further questions from me.
Councillor Christofini.
Thank you very much for that presentation. As you're aware, fire is a very big concern for us here. And you've said that the shelter is yet to be planned. There are, information that you need before that is decided how it's going to happen. Do you see any problems in the shelter being a condition? Part of the conditions?
Thank you for the question. The shelter is already part of the BMP. We've committed that we're actually providing that. So an additional condition possibly isn't necessary, but it wouldn't actually phase us if it was put in as an additional condition. We feel that the BMP is already committed to actually providing that.
Thank you.
Members?
Thank you. Look, you said in your preamble that in the scheme amendment stage, it was agreed the site would be managed as low threat. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, so there are 5 recommendations that are part of the BMP that went up to support
You might have to speak up.
There are a number of conditions that went with the BMP that supported the scheme amendment. The 4th one actually said that the site would be managed as a low threat outside the retained vegetation. So there's vegetation and conservation value on the site. Outside of that, it's to be maintained as low threat. Low threat means it's effectively managed. Now, a managed environment is one where you control the vegetation.
Yeah.
So you might use low flammability, high moisture vegetation.
So your landscape design then becomes a pretty
So like with the buildings themselves, the intention is to get this natural landscape. So the species of plants will be endemic, probably endemic plants that have a high moisture, low flammability. They'll be strategically placed to actually break fire runs up. And that's how you actually manage it. So the landscaping design is actually going to be quite sophisticated in terms of still being able to present the amenity. Like the buildings will use materials that present an amenity, but they're actually providing non-combustibility.
Thank you. Another question, if I may. In the scheme amendment stage, was DFS engaged in that at that stage, or?
Yes, they were.
Okay, so as an input or as an approving body or as a?
They were consulted in the same light that they were with regard to the bushfire management plan.
But ultimately, it's a Shire decision to the scheme amendment. So.
The scheme amendment was next in terms of
perhaps.
Sorry, want me to answer that?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, as a scheme process is a
Next.
Sorry.
The other guys can't hear you.
As a scheme amendment process, the Shire initiates, but ultimately it is up to the planning commission and finally the minister to decide on that.
If we're in general questions, the group, which I think we are at one stage. Can I just ask Alex a question? Are you going to be the hotel? Will you be the hotel operator?
Yes, we will.
Okay. What will be, and you haven't done this yet, but what would you imagine, and maybe you might need to I'm managing a hotel, managing hotel guests in a hazard situation, or a likely hazard situation is quite different to a household.
Yes.
So what would the management regime look like, would you think, as a hotel manager, when you've got guests and a fire over the hill?
Yes. So notwithstanding, we still have to work through a series of procedures to actually nail down a plan. Our experience in our other properties, which also includes a property in the Northern Territory which has both bushfire and flooding risks, including flooding risks at the moment with guests arriving today. So we have to map out a series of contingencies for a variety of eventualities. We have to train all of our staff in all of those contingency plans, and obviously provide actual mock evacuations, etc., just as they do for other sites and in the emergency services, as well as have a full crisis management plan to back that up should we find ourselves in a very sticky situation where it has unfolded into something more serious. So there's a series of plans that we would be producing for this. We have not produced them yet because we're not at that stage of the project. However, we have done this in our other properties, and it is something that we will be ensuring meets, to Anthony's point, a higher bar than we could probably get away with if we were in a different set of circumstances. But I think we won't be in a position to take any shortcuts.
But am I reasonable to assume the short of it is, if there's a hazard, you get people out of it?
Correct. Our first approach is evacuation. Will always be evacuation. And to quote a colleague of my own who said it's not the same as when it's your own house and you have a choice, do you stay and defend? There's no choice. People will be told that they have to leave, and that will include all of our staff, and not leave anyone on site. And we will have mitigation measures in place, such as sprinkler systems that can be automatically activated, don't require somebody to be physically present to do that, so that we can make sure people are safe as our first priority.
Thank you.
And a question around the scheme amendment, and I foreshadow a similar question to the Shire's officers. The scheme amendment obviously assessed and put forward development requirements, which seem to have been met. The issue of SPP 3.7, was that put to one side? Was that assessed? Are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, so between the BNP and the scheme amendment, there was a change to the guidelines. So the scheme amendment was done under 1.3 of the guidelines and the BNP under 1.4, but there wasn't a change of substance return. So what actually happened, the main change between 1.3 and 1.4 was that what were a position statement on tourism development actually got put into the guidelines of 1.4, but the same requirements were actually there. So the BNP that supported the scheme amendment referred to that position statement, but those items in that position statement that the BNP refers to are now in the guidelines of 1.4. So in answer to your question, 3.7 was very much at the heart of the scheme amendment. It was addressed by performance principle. So what we're able to do, the acceptable solutions provides one way of being able to resolve a problem. You can also, if you can't achieve site, and you can actually use the higher construction level to actually achieve the same outcome. So a building that's at 12.5, it's built to 12.5, has the same risk as a building at flame zone, because the flame zone has a higher construction zone. So they're both expected to have a 90% resilience.
So did the scheme amendment include the same development concept as we are currently considering?
Largely, yes. Yeah. So in terms of all the fundamentals, in terms of the access arrangement, the management of the land, and the
Bush
site.
cottages?
The bush cottages, I believe, were in that, but they were new buildings. The new buildings were always going to comply with AS 3959. They weren't really part of the challenge. The challenge really was with regard to flame zone construction, so the performance principles. The number of keys at the site hasn't actually changed. But I can't say for sure what whether we control that design change.
No, thank you for that. And as I said, I've foreshadowed a similar question to the Shire's officers. The other question was around DFIS, and you've obviously seen DFIS's response. For this panel, we've got a vulnerable land use in the context of fire management. We've got a flame zone. We've got Bell 40. So the consideration of public safety is a very critical issue. And under clause 67 of the deemed provisions is probably the most significant because it is public safety. In my mind, this site warrants special consideration for fire management because of those issues. In terms of this panel reaching a decision that those things are appropriately addressed, you indicated that there's further detailed work to be done to reach those performance measures. What comfort does this panel have that those things can be addressed, can be addressed?
Yeah. So I think that the comfort is taken in the fire resistance level of 6060, which is
You need to speak up, Anthony.
Sorry.
The
comfort needs to be taken in terms of the FOL level of 60-60-60, which we're going to design to, which is above the FOL level for flame zone. The issue with regard to vulnerable development. Firstly, vulnerable development has an additional feature. It has a bushfire emergency evacuation plan that accompanies vulnerable development for that very purpose. So it's high risk development, you actually provide basically assessment that it's not going to have an impact on the community. There was mention of objective 5.1. That's what objective 5.1 actually refers to. Don't introduce a threat to a community. So don't address something that's going to cause harm to other third parties. In terms of the bushfire emergency evacuation plan, that covers basically the preparation. So the BMP, the details of the site, give you the options for safety. As I mentioned, the primary goal is to evacuate if possibly can. This actually has a contingency of safety in terms of the shelter. Now, the things that we're talking about with regard to the shelter design that we're sort of uncertain about at the moment is you can have active systems and you can have passive systems, but the need for the active system will depend on how big the window sizes are. Are you using external shutters? Are you keeping the radiant heat out? So it's those sorts of details and those sort of balance in with the design vernacular and then the expectations of the insurance companies which want sprinklers on everything. So we have a challenge of, how do we manage how much water do we have on site if we use sprinklers as the only solution? What's going to be the combination of water and passive? And these are the things that we're actually thinking about in terms of the tenability. So that's the fine detail. But at the end of the day, the building's going to have to achieve an FRL of 60-60. And it's also going to have to comply with the community refuge guidelines, which actually provides the tenability requirement. So the tenability measures the toxins, humidity, internal temperature, all that needs to actually be protected, including smoke. So they're the tenability criteria. The external aspects, anyone can build a building that's non-combustible. That's not hard. You can have a non-combustible shed, but you wouldn't be able to survive in it because the internal heat, the tenable conditions would not be survivable. So we need to do both. So my uncertainty isn't uncertainty that we won't achieve it. It's just that the final combination, we don't know precisely yet because we have other parties that might have a say in what those solutions might be.
All right, thank you. My final question, Alexandra indicated that the primary response is evacuation. I think you've said the same thing. Quite clearly, DFIS is unhappy about one access in and out of the property. I know there's 2 access points to the road, but 1 driveway. Given that's priority, if that can't be achieved, the consequence is the shelters. Is that That's correct.
That's the contingency, but I might also should add that element 5, the tourism development, envisaged this situation. It was brought in specifically because most coastal destinations only have one road in. So if we don't have the option for shelter on site and there's only one access, then you're going to be denying tourism development across the state near the coast, and that's where most of our tourism development is. So element 5 came in specifically to address this issue, and that's what we're following. So it wasn't in the tourism position statement before, it's now sitting in the guidelines, and that's what they've actually followed. We've used a performance solution on the shelter because we've got more than 100 people there, but the building has the capacity, it meets all the other requirements for a refuge. So in that basis, we actually satisfy the precaution because we're actually achieving the same outcomes.
Okay. Right. Members, is there other questions? Councillor Christophini?
My question is to Ms. Bird, and is in the context of evacuation being the primary response in the case of a fire. I'm interested to know what is the staff to visitor ratio that you're expecting to have on the premises.
Thank you, Councillor Christophini. I would love to give you the exact answer. My head of people and culture can, because we have a 2-to-1 ratio, but that includes staff who are not working physically on this site. They'll be working at our head office or other locations. So my best estimate is probably 1.5 to 1.6 staff per guest, and we have a maximum guest capacity of 62.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? No, okay. And the last presenter, next one. Feel like I've got the easy bit.
Thank you, panelists. As Anthony mentioned, the Walkwood House site was the subject of a previous scheme amendment, and that was expressly designed to fulfil a particular development vision, and the proposal before you today is highly consistent with that. I can confirm it's highly consistent with that development vision. The main change being that the scale has been reduced down somewhat to better manage the environmental and cultural values of the site. So at this point, this proposal is almost completely consistent with all scheme provisions, with only a few minor variations which have been addressed by the and supported by the RDAP. We did, however, have some minor issues with 3 of the recommended conditions approved, and we would ask you consider modifying those conditions. Now, we previously discussed those variations with Shire officers. We understand that they are supportive of the proposed changes, and I've previously sent a memorandum to government members outlining those proposed modifications. So in summary, those modifications are firstly on condition 26, which is a fencing condition, and we're simply looking to reduce the prescriptiveness of that condition. Firstly, so we don't end up fencing areas that don't need to be fenced and perhaps is not desirable to be fenced for various reasons, including allowing fauna movement through the site. And also where post and wire fencing might not be the appropriate style for the location. Hence the alternative wording that the boundary fencing be designed and installed to the satisfaction of the Shire, as simple as that. The other 2 conditions, 36 and 37, relate to accommodation limits, and while the numbers applied in each of those conditions need to be corrected in any case because they're not accurate, it was felt that those 2 conditions could be consolidated into one single condition that just applies an overall limit for the whole site rather than stipulating chalets and hotel. So hence that condition would be that the guests accommodated any one times limited to a maximum of 62 people. And that's really all I'm asking for from the panelists to consider. We hope that you will agree that the project meets the expectations of excellence and cultural and environmental sensitivity that this site deserves, and support the application, including our request for modification. Thank you.
Thank you, thanks. Members, questions for Mr. Barnett? Ms. Hope?
Thank you, and thanks for your presentation, Lex. I just had a question about the interface to the river. I was interested to understand about how that will work. On one side, on both sides of the property actually, is Parks and Recreation Reserve up to the foreshore. I'm interested in how that operates on the site. And I understand there's been a previous approval that's been implemented about regenerating along the foreshore. How do you see that part operating? I suppose in other stretches of the river, there's a bit more public access. Is that a different case for this part of the river?
Thanks for the question, Canella, and I'll try my best to answer that adequately. We have great landscape architects who would be much better placed, but it is true that we have already sought and received approvals to do regenerative works along the foreshore. I think the property boundary does extend to the river shoreline, and one of the benefits of having that is that this owner and operator will maintain control and management responsibility for that riparian environment. And I think what's been approved and implemented to date shows a commitment to restoration of the natural riverine environment, and they have been, I think, recorded as excellent custodians of that area to this point.
Okay, so there's no intention then for public access along that stretch, as there is, at least in theory, on both sides.
I think in theory is the operative comment there. There's no particular intention to change the status of the property's current accessibility at this point. And I think if you look at either side, there's no clear and visible public access. There is public land. You're quite correct in the way of foreshore reserve, but the physical accessibility is quite limited, as it should be, because it's environmentally it's an extremely sensitive shoreline.
Okay, thank you. I also just had a question. You've pointed out some suggested amendments to a couple of the conditions. Did you have any other comment just in general about the other conditions? And I'd be particularly interested in your view about the public art condition, given the nature of this development where it's positioned.
Yes. So we have discussed all of the recommended conditions at length with Shire officers. We had several questions which have been adequately answered and resolved with them on all but these two conditions, which, as I have said before, they are also supportive of the changes that we've proposed, is my understanding. The public art condition, certainly the applicants have no issue with the imposition of that public art requirement. They are very committed to promotion of local art. There was a discussion as to whether that should be more specific, more precise, that the public art component should be provided on the site. Which I don't think there would be any issue with doing and committing to, but the real question arose as to how public that art might be if it is not a publicly accessible facility. So through discussion, we felt it was more appropriate to keep that condition more open-ended that public art provision be made in some way, shape or form to an equivalent value.
Thank you. That's answered my questions.
Members, any other questions for Mr. Barnett? Thank you, Lex.
Okay. Can I please approach and just make 2 clarifications on some earlier commentary?
If they are quick.
They're very short. Thank you, Presiding Member. It's just regarding the scheme amendment and the number of keys compared to today. I noticed earlier Anthony suggested that the same number of keys, but the scheme amendment, the provision for 40 keys, we've reduced that to 25 keys in this proposal. And the other thing with the bell rating on such a complex site, just wanted to reiterate that there are a range of bell ratings from 12.5 up to FZ. The majority are not FZ or bell 40. Those are just in certain parts of the site. The remaining portions are 12.5 to 29. That was all. Thank you.
But part of the proposed development is within the bell 40.
Yes, correct.
Okay, yeah, no, I understood. There are variations throughout the site. Thank you. Thank you, presenters. Now we move to the Shire Augusta-Margaret officers. Now, who have we got in the room?
Hi, Tony. Yes, it's Matt Cuthbert here with Harriet Clark and Lucy Gowes.
Good afternoon. I can barely make out who's there, but I can recognise the voice. Might put on my glasses. Questions of Matt Cuthbert. I'll kick off. Matt, there was a question around the scheme amendment and the relationship of the current DA. Can you provide a bit more detail about what the scheme amendment included and the relationship to the current DA?
Sure. As you would imagine, the scheme amendment contained a range of supporting information, including a sort of a broader level bushfire management plan. Unlike Anthony, we wouldn't say that the recommendations of that plan are in some way locked into place, and that any bushfire management plan prepared at this time would need to, in an absolute sense, be comparable with what was done at that level. What the scheme amendment did do is result in a suite of development control provisions that were inserted into the scheme. And as you would have seen when you were reading our report, they are the metrics that we've used to judge this proposal against. And they do, as you know, include the fact that the proposal needed to be acceptable from a bushfire management perspective.
So is it fair to say you did anticipate that as part of a DA there would be further consideration of bushfire management?
Yes, that's correct. I think what you can take from the scheme amendment is, at that point in time, the Shire, the Planning Commission and the Minister were all comfortable with a certain level of development on the site, albeit that the finer detail, of course, would need to come via an application such as this.
Yeah, thank you. Members, any other questions? Ms. Hope?
Thank you. Matt, I'm just interested in your commentary around the number of staff. We've talked about the conditions that limit the number of guests, and it was discussed just earlier about that ratio of staff to guests. Does the Shire have any concern about that number? Obviously, it contributes to the number of people that might be on site at any one time.
It does, but that's been taken into account when we've been looking at all things that would be influenced by the level of people on the site, right the way through from traffic and transport to effluent disposal to parking and so on and so forth. So both guests and staff have been taken into account when we've been looking at all of those various aspects.
Thank you. Just following on from the questions I asked Lex, did you have any further comment to make about that parks and recreation zone and that river interface? I gather the officers concur with that approach.
Yeah, we do. I mean, there's one place along the foreshore where you'd anticipate that guests would be accessing the river if they particularly wanted to, but I don't think it would be wise to open up the foreshore, which has been really immaculately maintained and added to in recent times as far as additional planting is concerned, to more general public access. And that's the case either side of this side as well. There's some really sensitive areas there, not only environmentally, but also culturally. And so, you know, we wouldn't see it to be the right response to sort of open those up to a more general public access.
Okay. And just confirming that the Shire is agreeable to the suggested changes to the conditions that the applicants put forward as well?
Yeah, so they have been shared with us. We've had a look at them. We're happy to support those. They don't change in any actual way anything that we were anticipating having happened. If anything, they just fine-tuning things that make their intent clearer.
Okay. I suppose the final question for you is, do officers have any other, I suppose, general statements to make? Obviously, this proposal is in a very sensitive location. It's an important location. There's been some very critical safety issues in particular raised. Is there any other reassurance that officers would like to provide to the panel?
Yeah, sure. So I think something that goes directly to that point is this idea that's been raised that that JDAP can't approve this proposal for the reason that the BMP hasn't been approved or endorsed by DFES. So just specifically on that topic, what we wanted to say is that DFES haven't endorsed or approved a BMP in this Shire since 2015. And talking to our counterparts elsewhere, that's the case across the state. In part, the reason for that is that they don't acknowledge the performance principle component of the policy at all. They read the policy as if that element doesn't exist. The Planning Commission's acknowledged this, and unlike previous iterations of the guidelines, the current version 1.4, contains a statement. It's very relevant to this proposal because it's at 5.5.1, which relates to vulnerable land uses. And it says, it should be noted that DFES will provide advice, but do not endorse BMPs or emergency evacuation plans. SPP 3.7 will be amended to reflect this. So as you would probably be aware, the Planning Commission are going about amending SPP 3.7 in the guidelines presently, and so we would expect that would be reinforced through that policy in the future. The other thing that's been mentioned is that clause 5.19 of our scheme says that all BMPs need to be endorsed by DFES. We don't read it that way. That's not what it says. It says that where a condition requires a bushfire management plan to be endorsed by DFES, then certain things flow from that. It doesn't say that a BMP is not a BMP unless it's endorsed by DFES. Even if you came to the view that that is what it says, then clause 5.5 of our scheme provides broad scope for us or the JDAP to look at variations to development standards. So I don't think you need to rely on 5.5 here. I think a better interpretation of 5.19 is that, you know, BMPs don't necessarily need the endorsement of DFES, and that would be perfectly in harmony with what the guidelines are saying. So all of that is not to say that bushfire safety is, not important, and quite clearly it was the most challenging aspect of the proposal for us, particularly in relation to how bushfire management safety interacts with all of the other sensitive aspects of this site, most importantly, the environment and cultural heritage. And in fact, in DFES's submission, they said, well, if you wanted to achieve compliance, you could, of course, make changes that were at the kind of sacrifice, if you like, of cultural heritage and the environment, but we weren't prepared to accept that. And so we went into quite some great detail with the proponent, looking at individual trees, having them all tagged and marked and GPSed, walking the sites in, quite some detail, seeking further information to get to the point where we thought that a BMP could be put together and implemented that would provide, the high level of safety that that this development needs. And then as an extra precaution, recommending that if the JDAP was in any two minds about whether or not that was acceptable, the opportunity for it to be reviewed by another level 3 consultant. So that's there as well.
Thank you. That answers my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Binks.
Thank you. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
I hear what you say about DFES and the bushfire management plan. What is the current status of local government fire emergency services acceptance of that plan?
They don't play any further role in relation to accepting or endorsing the plan. The plan is part of the project. DFES have made their comments on the project, and that's, the full extent of what their involvement will be. If the project's approved with a condition that that plan be implemented, it will be implemented, and then it will be signed off by someone who's qualified to do that, to check that all of the various measures that are included in it have in fact been delivered to the site.
And that is that's the standard procedure. Is that correct?
It is. Yes, it is. Yes.
Why does SPP 3.7 mention that the bushfire management plan needs to be jointly endorsed by state and local government fire emergency services?
Because that's the way that the process was originally conceived. From that moment on, that never occurred, and that's why the guidelines anticipate a change to that wording, because the partners in the policy, being the Planning Commission and DFES, haven't been able to resolve that issue between them to deliver that particular outcome.
And that's been acknowledged.
It has.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you know what we've talked a lot about evacuation and about guests and staff. Do you know what the proponent's view is on the protection of the infrastructure? Should there be a fire and we have people seeking shelter in the on-site shelter? Do you know whether the proponent would be expecting local fire services to protect the infrastructure itself?
No, I don't. But I would say that most landowners understand that volunteer bushfire brigades aren't under any obligation to go anywhere and fight any fire, if they thought it was putting the volunteers at risk. So if the project was designed based on a premise that it would be protected, that wouldn't be a wise sort of thing to expect. But I would be surprised if that was the case here.
Yeah. And has there been any consultation between the Shire and local fire emergency services as far as their views on the proposed development?
No, they're not one of our routine referral bodies, if you like. We would do that consultation with DFES rather than the local brigades.
Right. Okay. And DFES have said that they're not in favour of it.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Members, any other questions of the Shire officers? No? Right, thank you very much. We now move to the item, and members, is someone prepared to move the RAR recommendation?
Sorry, Councillor Christophini is here.
Councillor Christophini, you're moving the RAR recommendation? Is there a seconder?
I'll have it a second.
Mr. Stein. Councillor Christophini, do you want to talk to the motion?
Microphone. Thank you very much. I forwarded an amendment that I wanted to have included in the RAR recommendation, which relates to adding the condition of a shelter, which we have spoken about.
Yeah. Councillor Christophini, can we handle that as a separate modification?
Sure.
So
okay. I mean, I think this this proposal is a very considered proposal, which has gone through very rigorous stages of development. And we have heard today from the proponents and from other people, there's been very considered solutions proposed for this development. I think it merits our consideration. The RAR went through all the details in absolute detail, and I think we should be supporting it.
Thank you. Mr. Simon?
Yes, thank you. Look, every development's a very complex balance of different factors, and it doesn't matter how big or small it is, and this is one of the more complex ones, I think. It's simultaneously got to balance heritage and environment and economic activity with safety concerns. And each one of those, unusually, I think, are really prominent. The environment is a prominent consideration, heritage is a very prominent consideration, and safety is a very prominent consideration. Mm-hmm. And equally, we wouldn't be talking here unless there was some economic activity underneath it. The SPP 3.7 is important as a reference document, but it's a due regard document for a reason. And that reason is that, and there's plenty of case law on this, that regulations of this type shouldn't be followed slavishly, that there is room for very considered and very detailed elements as to how the acknowledged safety threats can be mitigated. And I think in this case, they have been illustrated quite well, and that there are multiple legs to this. A, illustrates how carefully this has been done, and B, illustrates how complex the equation. And I do recognise that construction is an important aspect of it, and I'm intrigued by the cladding for the cottages. That's sort of an interesting situation. The landscape proposal, the landscape plan itself, is a very, very considered one, and it's really unusual at this level of DA to have something of that level of detail, that you've got multiple fire zones within the landscape built in, and they have been identified. The management aspect of it also, I think, is a critical one here, and that it is a very high quality development is unquestioned. that it is and that's important, I think, in this case, because it means that the environment itself will be managed to a very high standard. I think we need to be very confident of that. And I think the nature of the proposal is that this curated landscape will be maintained in its pristine form for as long as it's operating as a hotel. That's part of the market offering, but it means it's also something which is a value of the proponent. I think we can accept that. The other thing is this is a short stay accommodation. Short stay accommodation means that the people who are in charge can have a high level of management about a high degree of management of what the activities of the people on their side are. In this case, if there's a level of danger and the management plan says people need to leave quickly ahead of the danger being manifest, which I would expect to be in the plan of a management plan, that's something that they can be in control of, and that gives a considerable degree of comfort, I think. So I think that in this case, these issues have been addressed very well. It is something that we can be confident in, I think, and I think that the Shire has also, the Shire officers have accepted that position also is very important. So I think for all of those reasons, not apart from the fact that it's a very high quality development and will be a real asset to the Shire, apart from that, the issues that are presented before us as reasons that will give us concern, I think in this case, need not give us concern. I think they've been properly addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Members, is anyone opposed to the motion? No. I am opposed to the motion, and before I indicate why, I'll make some clarification. I'll clarify. In terms of the proposed use, I think it generally satisfies the planning framework and the development controls that were introduced as part of the amendment. I'm also satisfied that the Indigenous heritage issues that have been appropriately addressed, obviously given Section 18 approval was also granted. I also think the proposal is generally well considered and achieves very positive heritage and built form outcomes and maintains the heritage landscape significance of the site and will offer, as Mr. Simon indicated, a very unique tourism offering. I am, however, concerned and unconvinced that the BNP does comply with SPP 3.7. Now, SPP is only a policy, but it's a high order policy in terms of the state of Western Australia, and therefore warrants high regard. Notwithstanding that perhaps DFIS is generally difficult to deal with, it had its highlighted issues of concern. I acknowledge that the applicants indicated that the measures proposed exceed requirements, but there's a high degree of trust put to this panel in order to determine that. I mentioned as part of the question the deemed provisions, and clause 67, one of the highest order requirements is public safety. And when you consider, in my mind, when you consider the BAL rating, and I acknowledge it's not all high and it's not all flame zone, a great deal of the site is 40 and above, which is very significant. And we must give due regard to the issue of fire safety. And at this point in time, I'm not comfortable supporting an approval. Having said that, I don't believe that it warrants refusal. And I would have put a motion suggesting that the item be deferred so that there can be further consultation with DFIS and the Shire in terms of understanding more fully how these performance measures are addressed, because they potentially can be addressed, but I'm not comfortable that we should just, as a panel, leave them to be addressed by other parties. That responsibility rests with this panel. So for that reason, I won't be supporting the motion. And I will put, given the opportunity, an alternative. Standing orders provide for someone else to speak in favour of the motion. So any of the other panel members are welcome to make comment in support of the motion.
We address conditions. Yes, before we do that, Councillor Christofini, did you want to make a comment?
To my mind, thank you for that. I mean, I think this is in everyone's mind, and I think the performance solutions, I don't know, they need to be devised as proponents suggested at a technical level, and is part of they're going to be, I mean, there are some uncertainties, but they are going to be developed as the design proceeds. I was sort of thinking that making the shelter a condition, the shelter which they themselves are proposing to have a condition, would satisfy for myself that we have addressed our responsibilities.
Thank you, Councillor Christofini. Ms. Hope?
Presiding member, is it possible to move a procedural motion so that we can suspend standing orders and have some discussion amongst the members on this?
Yes, I'm happy for that to happen. So would you like to do that?
Yes, I'll move that motion.
To suspend standing orders. There a seconder for that? Councillor Binks. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Ms. Hope, did you want to make a comment?
Yes. Thank you. I think it's worthwhile having some discussion. I agree with Councillor Christofini that it's a really critical issue, and it's certainly something that's been at the forefront of my mind as well. I suppose I had some comfort in the conditions that have been proposed, and have also been reassured by what we've heard from the applicant in particular about the level of responsibility that ultimately rests on their shoulders.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the fact that there's the nature of the development A is important. The fact that whatever further technical reports are done in terms of building management and so on, and the fine detail of the final construction, which is important, needs third-party review, and that itself then gets signed off at the Shire level. I think that sort of does the job of DFES in a way, in terms of protecting the safety and making sure that the objectives of 3.7 are met. And so for that reason, I'm very comfortable.
Yeah, and I take on board as well that whilst DFES have a referral authority role, you know, proposals are not contingent upon gaining their ultimate sign-off and endorsement. That obligation still rests with the proponent. I suppose I asked a question earlier in terms of Mr. Rowe's qualifications as a level 3 assessor, which is the highest level of qualification, as I understand, in these issues. And we've also explored that relationship between the scheme amendment, which set up the conditions and the ability for a tourist development, knowingly with one access only, to be considered in this forum now. But yeah, I certainly take on board, Tony, the concerns that you've flagged. I suppose the other part of it, And I did have some similar thinking to you about whether this should be deferred so that that issue in particular could be explored further. But my concern is that we still end up at the same point. What other alternatives might that process actually reveal?
You're quite right. And given the comments made by the Shire officers that DFIRS is somewhat difficult to deal with, my view was that it's not contingent on this panel to seek approval from the referral authorities. That's not necessary. We'll consider comments, and which is the case. My view was more around the SPP 3.7, and that's a planning document. And as a panel, we needed to have some serious regard, and that's where I landed on the position I have in terms of not wanting to refuse the application, but also not being convinced at this stage that the issue of fire safety could be just left to fine-tuning conditions of approval.
Yeah, and I suppose the difficulty is if it is deferred and that process occurs, what other outcome might eventuate? As I see it and reading through that material, the options are being incorporated into the development in a sense. I suppose I turn my mind to what other conditions could be imposed, and I return back to the starting point that the conditions as set out do cater for the level of risk and the level of commitment, responsibility that's ultimately going to fall on the applicant or the operator.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the land use itself has been signed off some time ago by the Commission by the scheme amendment. So the issues of road access and so on really have been addressed at that stage. We're really talking about the fine detail of whether you can actually satisfactorily build a structure in these sorts of conditions. And I can't see how we're going to expect any more information than what's before us until you've got, final working drawings, as it were, which is probably unreasonable for us to expect. I think the level of information we've got in front of us is A, sufficient, and B, we're not going to get any better information. It doesn't matter how long it's deferred.
Can I just add to that? It's not only final working drawings of the buildings. I mean, the BMP also relies a lot on final refinement of the planting scheme, and so on. So yes, until all of that is decided, I can't see what other detail we can have. The only thing that I felt was missing, although the proponents are committed to having the shelter, was simply a condition that happen. And I felt that could satisfy us, that we have discharged our responsibilities in this area.
Councillor Binks.
Yeah, thanks. And I've been sitting here listening to everybody. It's been immensely valuable. Thank you, everyone, for your input. It's been really very, very helpful. Tony, I started off feeling very uncomfortable about the fact that SPP 3.7 that this was just not meeting those policy requirements. I understand that there is some frustration with DFES and their response to bushfire management plans, and that happens. However, it's been acknowledged that there are some issues with that particular requirement of 3.7, and that they are being addressed. I guess that I am concerned that this particular development is not reducing risk, but it is increasing risk, and that is one of the other points that's mentioned. That's an area of concern. So I would like to see that risk mitigated somewhat by Councillor Christofanini's amendment. I think that would be helpful. It is listen. When you weigh it all up, the benefits to the community are going to be enormous. There'd be significant benefits to the community. There are risks associated with it. When he looked at the first slide in the proponent's presentation, it was all the buildings burnt out, and I thought to myself, oh gee. But we've learned a great deal about bushfire management since that fire took place, and I think I'm inclined to support this proposal because I do think that we can handle the bushfire management side of things. Canella, I agree with you that deferring it might not actually get us terribly far, except the proponent who's worked for so long and done such good quality work will be a little bit more frustrated, and I don't think we need to frustrate people. So I think that I am going to be supportive of the proposal, particularly with Councillor Christofanini's proposed amendment. That's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, members. So can I suggest we get back into standing orders? If,
one more comment. Yeah, just one more comment, and it's on the level of risk. It's useful for me to think about where that risk lies and where it lands. And there are two elements. There's risk to persons and there's risk to property. And we've got then, if it's risk to persons, then we're most concerned initially about two things. A, is the management of those people sufficient to get them off the site in a matter of danger? And the answer is, I think we can be confident that there will be very good management plans about that. And to that extent, as I said before, it's the nature of the facility that it is a hotel makes all the difference. I think to me, it's not a private residence. The other part of it, and then I think if you've got a backup, which is the refuge, then the risk to persons, I think, becomes sufficiently mitigated. The rest of it is risk to property. And in a sense, that's a problem not for the community, it's actually a problem for the landowner and their insurers. And I think we should be less concerned about that. I think we should be very concerned about risk to persons. I think we should be less concerned about risk to private property in this regard. I think in this case, both have been covered off, but I think it's useful to me to distinguish between those two types of risk.
Thank you. Councillor Christofanini, you're muted.
Mute. Okay. I just wanted to add that, of course, the proponents did talk about the additional measures that they would have in terms of lowering the risk to the property as well, in that they are going to have systems that are able to be deployed both from inside the property and outside of the property. So I agree. I mean, I think our principal concern has to be for people and property second, but I am satisfied that we have a proponent here who has given a lot of consideration to all these issues.
Councillor Binks.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my unanswered question, and I'd be seeking some enlightenment here, is in the event that the guests and staff are they seek refuge in the place that's been proposed and provided, what is going to be the response of the emergency services and the people who, the fireys who go in? Do they let the fires pass and let all the people sit there and hope they survive? or do they put themselves at risk through the one entrance into the property? I'm not sure how to deal with that one.
I don't think we can. No,
Councillor Binks, there's
it's
no
a
one here,
circumstance nobody knows anything about.
and there's no one that in this room that can make a comment in relation to the local brigade or DFIS as to what their response might be.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
Put one we're overhead or not, you know, there's, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ms. Hope?
Just one question for you, perhaps, Tony. In terms of the suite of conditions that are proposed, do you have any other suggestion about what might be missing? Did you have any thoughts about that?
I think in terms of making the approval more robust and providing perhaps a bit more enlightenment on the bushfire management measures, Councillor Christofini's proposal for a third-party assessment, or I might have been the Shire's comment, might provide greater certainty as a panel that the decision is well considered.
Okay, thank you.
Members, I'd like to resume standing orders and get to the item unless there's any other final comments. No, so I can.
Sorry,
Councillor Binks.
Yeah, just a matter of process. Do we need to be considering Councillor Christofanini's amendment before we consider the substantive motion?
We will consider any modifications to conditions once we resume standing orders.
And I assume, presiding member, that will be an opportunity to speak to the motion as well. We haven't quite reached that.
Yeah. Sure. So if we resume standing orders, is someone going to move that? Ms. Hope and Councillor Binks seconded. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. So we're back in standing orders. Ms. Hope, did you want to talk to the motion?
Yes, I would like to take that opportunity. And like Councillor Binks, our discussion just then has been very useful. I will be supporting the motion, but I have thought long and hard about this issue, particularly about the bushfire risk matter. This is a site of great beauty, of cultural and environmental significance, plus also a lot of risk. It's clearly very complex, and that has been quite challenging. However, I'm satisfied that it's been carefully considered, and I feel comfortable overall that the planning framework has been met, and the discretion that's afforded to the panel can be duly exercised, particularly through the suite of conditions that are proposed. I would foreshadow, as part of an amendment, moving the applicant's request to amend those three conditions as well. I did also want to touch on, and we've focused heavily about risk issues, but overall I'm also very satisfied about the design response for the site. We haven't talked about it to any great extent, but that's not to say that it hasn't been considered. Clearly, the significance of the site and the level of effort of the consultant team to respect and respond to that, I concur that's very high. And I think that will bring great value to the site and the locality. So yes, so overall, despite some hesitation, I do feel reassured that we have satisfactorily understood firstly, but also addressed, particularly with the motion that's been foreshadowed, that the conditions are sufficient. And particularly, I think, the obligation that ultimately is going to rest on the applicant or the operator once the business is up and running in terms of managing this inherent risk at the site. So yes, thank you.
So, Ms. Hope, you foreshadowed changes to conditions while you have the floor.
Thank you. The amendment or the modification I'd like to move is as per the applicant's request. So that was that fine tuning of wording of conditions 26, 36 and 37 that are set out in the Part B document.
I think it's 35 as well.
I'm reading off the applicant's page.
Oh, sorry, 36, 37. Yeah, quite right. I apologise.
Yeah, so exactly as has been suggested by the applicant.
Okay, is someone, John Syme? Ms Hope, did you want to talk to that motion?
Just briefly, I'm satisfied that it provides some clarity and the Shire's agreeable to those changes. I think they're straightforward adjustments to make.
Thank you. Unless someone's opposed to it, I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Ms Hope, was there anything else you foreshadowed?
No, although I've indicated I will support Councillor Cristofanini's proposed modification as well.
Thank you. Councillor Cristofini, you want to propose some changes? You're on mute. Councillor, you're on mute.
I did circulate my proposed amendment, and that is that the bushfire conditions include the restroom building being designed and constructed to be compliant with the design and construction of the Community Bushfire Refuges Handbook, and in brackets ABCB 2014, and capable of accommodating 130 people in brackets guests and staff in the event that the evacuation from the site is not considered safe during the bushfire event.
Thank you. I'll second that. Councillor Binks. Councillor Cristofini, did you want to make any comment on that?
Oh, look, just simply to add that this is something that the proponents have put forward, but I think I would, as a decision maker, I would rather it be a condition so that we're all in agreement that this is going to happen.
Councillor Binks, did you want to make any comment? No? Okay. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Members, were there any other condition changes? And maybe I can't recall whether there was a condition requiring the third-party certification that's already there.
There is. It is there in the RAR.
That's fine. Okay, members, no other changes? In which case, I'll revert back to Councillor Cristofini to make any final comments.
Thank you. I mean, I think we have gone through this proposal, which is a very thorough proposal, as very well considered. It provides a fantastic solution to the site in many ways, as Canella has spoken, and it addresses the main concern that we've all had in relation to this proposal. Hasn't been in relation to the other values, but it's been in relation to the risk of fire, and I think we've arrived at something that mitigates that, and so I am happy to support this proposal.
Thank you. So we have a recommendation to approve. We've modified a number of the conditions. I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour? Opposed? The motion is carried. Just finishing off the agenda, Part C is other business, SAT applications and Supreme Court appeals, just for noting. Item 2 is general business. Members, is there any general business? That's Neil. And final item is meeting closure. Thank you everyone for your time. It's been a long meeting, but it's been very worthwhile. And I'll declare the meeting closed at 3 o'clock.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.